Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Hi, welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Gabrielle. So, Gabrielle, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do for a living.
Okay, so my name is Gabrielle Wolff. I live in the DFW Metroplex, and I am a licensed real estate agent.
Awesome. So, how did you get your job?
Well, I've always had an interest in real estate, specifically the finance piece. And it was time for me to pick a career, and I chose real estate. So I've been in the business now since 2014, so almost 10 years.
Awesome. So, what would you say separates someone who's successful in real estate versus somebody who's not? 'Cause I think that so many people go into it and they are just not successful. Obviously, you've been in it for a long time. So, what do you think has separated you from other realtors per se?
Well, I think a lot of people get into it with the idea of HGTV and selling sunset. Like, oh, all I have to do is take some photos of myself and, don't really realize that it's actually, I think, a high skill and important job, I feel like. You've got to really be good at negotiating. Like, this is a big deal. People are buying and selling houses, right? Most people don't buy something bigger than a house. So it's important to care about your clients and care about doing good for them more so than just thinking it's going to be a quick, easy paycheck, because that is definitely not how you could describe real estate.
So I guess can you just talk more about how you got started? 'Cause I think, for our audience it'd be interesting because, obviously, I mean, like you had to start somewhere. So what did that look like to even get your first sale? Like, I'm sure like that wasn't easy. So what was that like for you?
It wasn't. So I was super young when I started out, and I did not have a great sphere of influence. So I really, really had to work hard to improve my sales skills and actually go out and meet people that I didn't know, knocking on doors, calling people. Gosh, I probably have done 2 to 3 open houses a weekend for the first several years of my career, right? So actually really going out there and finding the business myself rather than, relying on a network to refer it to me. Then also being young, there was a lot of people that were hesitating too. So it was definitely a big grind to get here.
So can you just talk more about that? Like, were you making, like you said, like lots of cold calls, or like, I guess, how did you get like your first sale specifically?
My first sale was a bit of a nightmare. It was an in-law of mine, and no longer are they my in-laws. So it was intense. So the first one was from my sphere, and after that, I don't know, it's been so long and I've had so many. I couldn't even tell you after that first one. I do vividly remember the first one. It's not always easy to work with in-laws and family members, so we'll just leave it at that.
100%. So obviously, like now the market is, not as hot as it was the last like couple years since COVID. So how have you been able to like adjust and have things kind of slowed down for you? I guess like what are you seeing right now in the current real estate trends?
I think that it depends on who you are, right? So for me, actually, my big sources of business would be first-time home buyers, investors, and then listings that didn't sell the first time around. So for me, it's actually, I'm doing much better now that COVID has passed, because first-time buyers, I mean, yes, I still found them houses, but it was definitely much more challenging. Investors, I mean, there were some mega funds, but like a regular investor was really not able to compete. And then there were almost no listings that were expiring. So I was relying pretty heavily on referrals, which I get quite a bit of. But, now that the market's shifting, I think it's a great opportunity to help people, first-time buyers who weren't able to, get involved in that crazy COVID market. And, just because a house sold doesn't mean that the agent that sold it was actually a pretty good agent. So, there's going to be a lot of, I think, backlash for things that happened during COVID from less experienced agents. So that's going to be interesting how that plays out. But I've got a pretty positive outlook overall. For me, my business has always been, grinding it out and finding it. So I'm not at all concerned about the way that, what you hear on the news is not always accurate.
100%. So can you talk more about like some things that like a less experienced agent might have done or might do during COVID? Because I think it's important for people to know kind of what to look out for if somebody, is doing things that maybe that they shouldn't be doing or skipping certain steps. Like, can you just talk just more about those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's a really difficult thing to help people to understand, right? It's like you just expect that when you're speaking with a professional, they know what they're talking about. You're going on their expertise as, the hired professional. But there's bad attorneys, there's bad doctors, there's bad realtors. So I think one important thing is you want somebody that is going to, answer the phone and has a deeper knowledge of marketing a property. Customer service is important. Understanding, the paperwork is actually very important. Knowing what is in the contracts. Again, when it's very heavily in the seller's favor, it's difficult to make a mistake for a seller, but there's probably more so the buyer's agents are going to be having issues after how some of the contracts were written. It's tough to tell people how could you find a good realtor, right? Because there's so much that as a consumer you wouldn't know. So picking someone that is able to explain and answer your questions and actually cares and responds to you, I think are pretty important things.
Makes sense.
So we're talking about the good realtors. So for a normal person who is just going to buy a home, what are the parameters to find who is the good realtor?
Again, I think you want to make sure that they answer their phone and that they care. Real estate is not like 9 to 5 most of the time, right? So if you're calling your realtor to see something, obviously we have personal lives as well. So not to say that we can't have personal time, but they should be able to answer your questions. A contract, there's a lot of different elements to a contract. And until you get into signing a contract, you may not know what's in it, but your agent should be able to explain to you what each section of the contract is. Like, hey, if we have the seller pay title policy, it could affect our negotiation this way, or I think we could get the seller to pay for these things based on, this being on the market for X amount of time, or, we've got other offers, these are all of the fees that we could ask the seller to pay, but, or would you be okay to pay them knowing that there's other offers? So it's really like going line by line, like what does each section of the contract mean, and allowing the clients to actually understand and make the decision instead of just filling it out and having him sign it, right? So that would be number one. Number two, a house is different for everyone, right? So your home is not going to be the same as my home. It's not going to be the same as Dan's home. So having an agent that understands how to find the right home for you and your lifestyle, one that asks the right questions. Because if you've done your due diligence on your house, it should last you through whatever the market does, right? Because the values will come up if they come down. If it's the right house, you'll probably be in it 5 to 7 plus years. And, an agent understanding how to find your needs is a very important factor in that.
Yeah, completely makes sense. Sounds like plan to find a good realtor. So yeah. So okay. How difficult it is? Like I can understand, like everybody have their own personal life as well, but how difficult it is to respond back to the customers and just like you said, whoever is responding, giving you response on time and more accurately, like how difficult it is. And do you think the factor of personalized response is too much important in this regard?
I think it depends on what stage somebody is at in the process, right? If you're, wanting to look at homes, you need to get in touch with your agent right away. Sometimes if you're just kind of getting the process started, maybe you don't want to be, contacted every 2 minutes, right? So it depends on how far along, somebody is in that stage. It might be more helpful just to get, some email tips as you're, trying to figure out, or some listings in a particular area as you're trying to kind of decide. But it really is so specific to the individual with that as well. And just because somebody answers the phone doesn't necessarily mean that, that is an excellent agent either, right? So it's just something you want to be able to know that your agent cares about you and your house, or, your home sale or whatever.
Yeah, got it. Completely got it. So how technology is helping you in your business?
It's crazy when I started in 2014, how much technology has changed and how it's become, a much more important thing. It's always been important. It's always been there. It was had websites, social media, all of that stuff, but I don't think that anybody expected it to become as prevalent as it became through, coronavirus, where people are buying houses sight unseen with, whatever tours. And, now people are looking online, I think, a lot more than they were before. Photos were always important, but now, with TikTok and, back to be careful about the agent that you work with, you can sit on TikTok, social media, see an agent who does skits, and not knowing what you don't know, it all sounds good and it all sounds like it makes sense, and they may not even know what they're talking about either, right? It's so, on the one hand, it could be a good thing. On the other hand, just because somebody is doing a lot of content on social media doesn't mean that everything is accurate. I've definitely seen a lot of videos that are completely wrong information regarding real estate. So I'm sure everybody in their profession has said, wait a minute, that is not really how that works.
Okay, it means like if someone is very active on social media, it doesn't mean that he's legit or he's doing well.
Yes. But, not to say that, they're not, right? It's just, it's an interesting thing that, there's so many elements that go into picking the right person.
Makes sense. Completely makes sense. Do you think AI can play a good role in the field of real estate in upcoming days?
Yes, I do think that it can, and it does. It has some great content and some great ideas. It's still obviously in pretty early stages, but so far a lot of people are using it for, amping up social media content, providing information. I mean, it's just so crazy how things are evolving and changing now.
Yeah. But do you feel like AI, for example, like you mentioned, right? Because some buyers are at a very early stage, and they might not necessarily have to talk to somebody, that AI can be effective in the form of like a chatbot, like a personalized chatbot saying, hey, like, where are you at? Should you hop on a call with the realtor or not? And really guiding them at that experience until they're actually ready to look at homes.
We've actually had those AI chatbots for many years in real estate. I would say it could depend on probably the person and also the chatbot, right? Some people will prefer to actually talk to a person, physically meet with the person. Some people want to do everything online. They're happy to do an interview via Zoom. So it all is just so specific. And we've had them for a long time, and it just depends on who the audience is that is talking with the AI bot.
100%. So obviously you mentioned earlier that you're in DFW, as am I. Where do you see like the DFW market going in the next year or two? I mean, obviously it's I think one of the fastest growing, not the fastest growing like large metro area in the US, but do you see it going this way? And if yes, like what areas are, if someone's looking to buy, because you mentioned that you work with like investors, like what are some good areas where if somebody was going to invest, like that you would recommend?
Regarding that, where should you invest? And you're asking me all these questions, but it is very specific to an investor strategy. Do they want a cash flowing rental? Then you probably want to go in the outskirts. So Grayson County, parts of Cook County, Hunt County, where you can get something that cash flows. Some people would want something that, just has good appreciation potential. So in which case we would be talking about a lot of stuff in and close to downtown Dallas. Some people might just want something, in a really good school district, in which case, you could research the top school districts. So I have found working with investors, there's not a one strategy fits all. Some people are in it for the cash flow. Some people are in it for the tax benefits. Some people are in it for the long term, like I said, appreciation. So it's difficult to go wrong if you have an agent that understands the market and you're able to communicate with them kind of what your goal is. Obviously, the numbers are not as good as they once were. Way back, I remember when you could buy a brand new house for $160,000 and it was a great house. Those days are probably never going to come back. As for the rest of the market, everybody is moving to DFW. So whatever happens nationally, I think we will be in much better shape. And what we deal with here is there's actually already so many investors here, so many funds, so many different groups of, investors. And the second that anything starts to get too low in the starter home range, they're going to scoop it up and buy it. And they're going to either turn it into a rental or they're going to hold on to it long term. So I can't see prices going down much if they do. We have a lot of buyer hesitation with rates right now, but the prices are still going up. And, the second that the rates go down and everybody wants to buy again, everybody is going to be buying at the same time. So the prices are going to go up more, and the negotiations for the buyers will be much more favorable for the sellers at that point, right? So I don't see there being any major concerns with the DFW market at this point.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree. So, in terms of like you mentioned that there's different strategies when it comes to investors, and I'm sure obviously, from the time you started to now, that there's like, lots of changes. For example, like one thing specifically is short-term rentals. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing because there are a lot of cities that are changing some of their laws. So do you work a lot with that? And what does that look like in the near future?
So I do, and I have clients who, have some short-term rentals, and, some of my clients who, have a lease and they were kind of on the fence about turning it into a short-term rental. And then of course, Dallas came with, single family restriction. That was one thing. I mean, it's not sustainable if everybody is doing it, right? Yes, we have a ton of rentals. Yes, we have a ton of investors for like leases, but we also have a ton of people who are moving here, right? But there comes to a point you have so many Airbnbs. How many people are going to be staying in an Airbnb versus all of the hotels that we have? So initially it's probably extremely profitable, and it can still be good like midterm rentals, for a family who's displaced because of insurance or, a travel nurse, something like that. But the market became so saturated with Airbnbs, and because of the cash flow, people were paying a lot more for the Airbnb. It was like, oh, well, I could make so much more a month. I could make X amount per night because it's a per night thing. And even if I rent it out half the time, I can still afford to pay more. So it's going to be interesting, what happens with that, if people are going to be able to convert them to single family rentals based on cash flow, or if they're going to have to sell them off and take a loss. It probably depends on the individual.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's an interesting thing because, like, for me, like, I live in Dallas, but I have some midterm rentals in Fort Worth. And so, I mean,
Mhm.
Fort Worth also has changed some of the laws. It's the same thing that the zoning's not as tricky as Dallas, but it's definitely where I have the properties, they're zoned out for anything less than 30 days. So it's not, I mean, that was not my strategy beforehand, but it's definitely, helped me kind of solidify what I'm doing.
Yes.
So what would you say is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew before you started your career?
I don't know. That's tough. There's so many things, we're just on the subject of investing. I mean, I guess I wish I'd have known how much the prices were going to go up. Um, I mean, honestly, just thinking about what a house was when I started out and what it is today is just insane. Like I probably would have bought a bunch more. Um, so yeah, that would be my regret, not realizing how much it was gonna increase.
Yeah, I don't think anybody could have predicted, especially also like how quickly everything happened, like with COVID. It's just insane. Like I don't think anybody would have thought it would have happened like that.
No, I don't think so. And it's actually a little bit scary even for people now that are trying to buy and become homeowners or even trying to get their foot in the door for investing because the values are so much now. It's so much more difficult to get something. And the first time home buyer houses specifically are going to feel the least amount of they're going to feel the least amount of pressure if the market shifts in a downturn, because as long as those investors can lease out those rentals, the second that it is a favorable price, it's going to be gone. And it's not going to come down because, in 2021, 50% of the houses were actually bought by investors in Tarrant and Dallas counties. And they're never going to come back on the market for a first time buyer. So it's so critical to like own properties and make a good decision with the properties that you own.
100%. So if somebody watching this wanted to reach out to, do you mind sharing your website or just best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, for sure. So probably my cell phone number. They can call me, text me. My cell is 214-659-1890. That's my direct line. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. So my Instagram is at Buy and Sell with Gabrielle. BUYNSELL with Gabrielle.
Awesome. Well, Gabrielle, thanks so much for your time today. We're rooting for you. Hopefully have a great, Q4. And yeah, thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you guys.
Thanks. All right. Bye.
See ya.
Gabriel, bye bye.